I was a storm chaser once. Yeah, literally one time. It was a spring evening, I believe, and I had seen the stormy forecast. I could see the dark skies rolling across the central Illinois flatlands. And there in the parking lot between Koinonia and Stratford houses in Champaign, my college friends and I could see a little bit of a lightning show off to the southeast. So, of course, the most sensible thing I could think of that we could do is to load up my Taurus full of friends and drive towards it. You know, in college you may be getting smarter every week, but not necessarily wiser. In terms of chasing a storm, it was relatively uneventful. There was some rain, there was some lightning. But as we meandered around Champaign and Vermilion counties, someone realized that my gas gauge was sitting really close to empty. And now it's after midnight, which means these little towns we're going through do not have gas stations that are open anymore. So we started to wonder if our adventure was going to turn out to be being stranded out there somewhere on a dark and stormy night. Well, after what seemed like an embarrassing eternity sitting on E, we find a gas station open on the outside edge of Danville. And that's pretty much my storm chasing story. That's all there is to it. But about 15 years later, I was in a town called Gifford that's about a little more than 30 minutes away from Danville. And I was there with a team from church to help rebuild after a tornado had went through the previous fall and had obliterated the town. It had destroyed or damaged hundreds of houses in a town that only has hundreds of houses. I remember seeing and hearing about houses that were torn apart or leveled. I remember seeing a canoe that was wrapped around halfway up a tree. It was an F3 tornado, a wedge tornado, half-mile wide, and it went right through the middle of this little town. I remember hearing a story of a gal who was pregnant at the time of the storm, took cover in the bathtub of her house, hunkered down, and after the storm had passed, she got out, and she went outside, and her sidewalk was gone. Not because the storm had taken it, but it took her a while to figure out the storm had lifted up her whole house off the foundation while she was in the tub and turned it almost 90 degrees. Storms are incredible, and often not in a good way. So I've been through several Midwestern storms. I've seen some hurricane damage. But what about you? What is the most severe weather that you have experienced firsthand? Maybe you've been through a tornado or survived a hurricane, just seen some nasty thunderstorms or flooding. If you're with other people watching this video right now, push pause and share your severe weather stories with one another. The types of weather that we may experience depends on where we live and maybe just being in the right place at the wrong time. Our location nor our timing, however, matter as much for our spiritual storms of life. Following Jesus does not come with a guarantee of sunny days. We're actually told to expect troubles, and maybe more so because we follow Jesus. Psalm 46 has these descriptions that feel like the whole world is crashing down. And this is before threats of nuclear blasts, terrorist attacks, or pandemics globally. But certainly lines up with all the storms of life that we can have personally. Psalm 46 could carry the subtitle, "When My Terra Firma Feels Terrifying," because its description is about when our sources of stability, normalcy, and comfort become uncomfortable, abnormal, and unstable. When we face physical storms, we take shelter in the safest place we can find. We run and hide, afraid of how bad it might be. Psalm 46 is like that safe place for our storms of life. What kind of storms have you been through? And this time I mean the storms of life. Have you been in the storm of losing a loved one? where you were drenched in sorrow as it rained sadness day after day. Maybe your storm was like a storm surge that all of a sudden swept away what mattered to you. Have you been through a storm of a grim diagnosis and you felt like the world was suddenly falling apart? The storms of life block out the sunshine of our hopes and dreams and fill our view with blackened skies. Have you been in the storm of struggling with addiction, or someone close to you struggling with a mental illness? You know that storms can spin us around and disorient the sense of what direction we need to head in. And storms can sometimes destroy or take away our relationships. Have you been through the storm of repeatedly being ridiculed by an adversary? Maybe that storm was like a flash flood to your faith, or maybe it was a gradual eroding of your perseverance. Have you been in a storm where you've been face to face with an oppressive person, or maybe an oppressive system? You know, the storms of life don't just knock the wind out of our sails, sometimes they shred our sails to threads. Maybe you've been through the storm where you found yourself wedged into a no-win situation between members of your extended family or coworkers or between neighbors. Storms of life consume our comfortabilities and our confidence like tidal waves of chaos. And storms of life don't have to be F5 or Category 5 to turn our world upside down or make us feel powerless. They don't just throw us off schedule, they can blow us off course. The storms of life wash away from beneath our feet the solid ground that we thought we could stand on. Psalm 46 is aware of the realities of the storms of life. The author is also very aware of some other realities that are very promising. In this psalm, there's a refrain that is formed at least with verse 7 and 11. We could probably throw in verse 1 with that too, where God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble, and the Lord Almighty is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress. That ever-present help means that He is a help that can be found whenever we need it. It's a just-in-time help. It's not a help where we have to put in the application and then wait for weeks or wonder if our voicemail ever got heard or not. And He isn't some temporary retreat. He is an eternal refuge. But eternal doesn't mean it's a just for later thing. Eternal means now and later. So God provides a strength for any circumstances from now until forever. We're always going to be able to look around and see catastrophe in the world, clamoring for power and chaos among people. Yet it's all under His sovereignty. It's all under His control. In the heart of this psalm, there's an image of a city with a river flowing through it, and it gives great gladness. There is also a feeling in the midst of the chaos of restoration and refreshment. For those who are familiar with the Jesus stories in the Gospels, you might recall there's several instances of Jesus calming storms while He's out on the boat or out on the lake with His disciples. One of those instances happens in Mark chapter 4. They're out there and the storm comes up, and Jesus is actually asleep this whole time. They're to the point where the boat's about to be swamped under, and they wake Jesus up and they say, "Don't you care if we get killed here?" And I imagine Him almost nonchalantly sitting up, looking around and saying, "Quiet, be still." We're told, though, immediately it is calm and there is peace. If you're in the middle of one of life's storms right now, you might imagine yourself in that boat, feeling the storm about ready to swamp you under, and wondering if Jesus is asleep on the job. Well, it turns out, even when our faith in Him is not a sure thing, His hold on us and His peace is a sure thing. Just because we know that God has promised his presence doesn't mean we can remind ourselves of that during the storms and just feel okay. Psalm 46 does give us more than just a one liner of words of comfort, it gives us some practical guidance. And one clue is even just in a structure. You'll see in just these 10 verses, we have 3 times this direction to Selah, or your translation may go ahead and just say interlude. We don't know the exact meaning of that musical term. Our best guess is that it does mean some form of hold on, pause, maybe let the music keep playing, but consider what you just sang and prayed. It gets more direct then at verse 10, where God says, "Be still and know that I am God." The person who suggested this verse and said that this is a peace verse for her said this: "This verse, verse 10, helps me when I can't get out of my own head and reminds me that I'm not in charge. I can only do so much and the rest is out of my hands. It grounds me and gives me peace. It has helped me in times of loss, especially, and when life has spiraled completely out of my control. It helps me feel that everything is going to be okay, even if it isn't the way I planned it. I'm always taken care of." So, how can we see this okayness? How can we feel that okayness? Psalm says, "Be still." And the force of that verse is not just be quiet, have some silent time. It is stop what you're doing. Cut out the noise. The Message version jumps in and says, step out of the traffic. Because only when we stop our activity can we really notice God's activity. So this is not just a tool for surviving the storms. Daily stillness is also a habit for thriving. So try one of these or retry if you've tried them before. Most obvious one would probably be silent prayer. To be silent with God before we go through our prayer list, or maybe after we go through our prayer list, or both. Another form of prayer might be using a prayer that's already been written. Lord's Prayer would be a good example of this. Instead of having to come up with the words, we can just repeat those words and make them our own. Second idea is to pray a written prayer. This way we don't have to come up with the words. We can just make someone else's words our own. The Lord's Prayer would be an example. Another would be this: God, you're still in control, and you guard my soul. You're closer than the troubles that surround me. I know that your love is all around me. Third idea, another one with prayer, is simply to pray the name of Jesus. This is a good one for when we don't have enough in us to think of the words or to have energy to say a lot of words. We just say his name, Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Over and over. A fourth idea is to read the Psalms and to personalize them. The easiest way to do this is when you see, like in Psalm 46, where it says Jacob or maybe Israel, you change it to your own name or the name of your family or your church. A fifth idea is to do wake up worship songs. And it's best, at least for me, if I don't try to multitask. If I pick the songs and then I just close out everything else, put in the headphones, and just listen and let the Spirit use those words and that music to center me and to calm me. Another one would be to do Thankful Thursdays, or you can pick whichever day you want. You know, Jimmy Fallon writes thank you notes every week for comedic effect. Writing thank you notes actually can have a therapeutic effect too. It helps us focus on all the ways that God has blessed us. And the seventh idea is maybe my favorite one for being outside. It's a list of graces. You get somewhere where it's quiet and all that you can hear really is natural noises. And close your eyes for maybe a minute, maybe more. You may have to set a timer to help with that. And then after that time has passed, you write a list of what you heard that God has done that you had nothing to do with. You can do that with all the senses, whether it's hearing or seeing or sometimes even smelling. It helps us notice all of God's activity that doesn't depend on us. Daily stillness, like those kind of things, can lead us to have that same outlook as the psalmist does in Psalm 46, where he's almost like, let everything fall apart. Let all chaos break out. Let all hell break loose. Because I have a joyful river flowing through me from the very heart of God and through my soul. And I know that with God living in me and me living in him, that peace is indestructible.
Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down. Help my heart to hear your sound. Speak into my life, Lord, speak now. Slow me down, oh Lord, slow me down.
The world may typically think of peace as some passive state of no resistance. But the biblical idea of peace is that it's this overpowering, all-consuming force of God's presence. We have fixated on peace for 9 weeks now. I'm sure some of you are really ready to move on to something else. I have enjoyed, though, doing messages based on the verses that you have selected. And so I'm just going to attempt to do an all-consuming conclusion. Daily stillness is a key habit for living in God's peace, and doing good for others keeps us planting and cultivating seeds of peace in the gardens that are our lives. Christ is the one who holds it all together, and so we lean into his gravitational pull, and when we throw our worries to him, God can wash our worries away with his waves of peace. Following Jesus is a prosperous road that leads us to an all-the-above kind of peace. And while de-stressing is like nice little streams, the mighty river of Jesus' peace is unstressing. Being protected inside of God's power and love includes turning our worries into prayers and trusting Jesus to give us his strength, his power for peace. All that is to say that Jesus is the peace bringer. He wants you to have his peace. So may his peace be yours abundantly.